Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone. I'm State Senator Brad Hoylman, and I'm very happy to be here to moderate this panel on Slow It Down, Managing Speed for Safety. Uh, I'm here with a number of panelists who are going to be discussing this very important topic, who I'll introduce in a minute. But overall, we should note that every year over 40,000 people are killed in the United States on roads every year. An unimaginable loss that is just getting worse and worse. We know that speeding is the #1 contributor to fatal crashes. For every 1 mile per hour increase in a vehicle's speed, an individual is 3% more likely to be killed in a collision. Small differences in speed can mean life or death. We know that we can't achieve Vision Zero without systematically addressing the speed that vehicles travel. As you've heard, this panel brings representatives with local, national, and international perspectives on this issue. It also brings those who tackle speeding via legislative initiatives, technological innovation, and infrastructural improvements. There are also those who are outside advocates and those who administer the safety programs directly. I expect this is going to be a very rich conversation, and I know we're all eager to jump into it. Let me just introduce our panelists. The first panelist joining us is Amy Cohen. She's the co-founder of Families for Safe Streets. After her 12-year-old son, Sammy, was killed in 2013, Amy joined with others and helped found Families for Safe Streets in New York City. Amy and Families for Safe Streets efforts were instrumental, I can tell you this personally, in the passage in Albany of the new 25-mile-per-hour speed limit, as well as the speed camera program in New York City. She sadly learned firsthand that slower speeds save lives. A 5-year-old child was hit in the same location as Sammy by a driver obeying the new 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. Unlike Sammy, the other child survived. Next is Ethan Foley, who is the Vision Zero program coordinator for the city of Minneapolis. Ethan is the policy lead on Minneapolis's successful legislative effort to get local control for setting local speed limits. Seems common sense. He also led the creation of the Minneapolis Vision Zero Action Plan, Speed Limit Evaluation, and Street Design Guide, which guides the planning of all future street projects. Prior to joining the city of Minneapolis back in 2018, Ethan worked for a decade on transportation policy and community organizing related to complete streets and transit funding. He has a master's of urban and regional planning from the University of Minnesota and lives in Minneapolis with his wife and 7-year-old son. Third is Anna Villarreal. She is the public policy manager at the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP. She's currently based in Mexico City, and she's worked for international organizations, local government, and as a consultant on sustainable urban development. She holds a BA in Anthropology and Urban Studies with a concentration in Sustainable Development from Barnard College at Columbia, and has a master's degree in City Design and Social Science from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Finally, our last panelist is Kim Wiley Schwartz, who is the Assistant Commissioner for Education and Outreach for the City of New York, New York City Department of Transportation. And in addition, we have Luana Brashears, the Planning and Safety Director at ITE. Luana holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Brazil and University of Brasilia, Brazil, and master's and PhD in civil engineering with an emphasis on transportation safety from Auburn University. Prior to joining ITE, she's worked in public, private, and academic sectors. She's a registered professional engineer and holds professional traffic operations engineer and road safety professional certifications. Those are amazing qualifications for all of us, but let's get started. I wanted to ask Amy first. Are you able to share with us a bit about your story and the work you, Amy, and Families for Safe Streets have done to fight speeding.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. And it's an honor to be on this panel today. I still find it hard to believe every day that I wake up that my son is not here. You know, it's been October 8th, marked 9 years. Kissed him goodbye, a regular day. He went to school. I went to work. I went to my daughter's open school night this time of year. And that's when I got a series of frantic calls. And it's, you know, it's just unimaginable. He was smart. He was determined, stubborn, caring. And I do this work because I know he'd be fighting for me if our roles were reversed. So our first fight, as you mentioned, was lowering the speed limit. You know, I was just so full of pain and rage, and it had to go somewhere. It would have killed me. So I started speaking out. I connected with Transportation Alternatives. I joined with others. We formed Families for Safe Streets, and we decided our first campaign should be to lower New York City's speed limit. What we didn't realize, and even we learned the city council didn't realize, is that they couldn't do it without permission from the state legislature. So we took our fight to Albany, our New York State capital. And I have to tell you, other advocates, other legislators, some lobbyists told me it would take 10 years to make that change. That's how slow change typically goes in our state government. And we did it in one legislative session. We announced it ourselves in February of 2014, and by June we had passed the bill. So I think we realized that if you give a face to this crisis, you can make change, and managing for speed was our first campaign because it is, you know, the number one priority of things that really can save lives. So, you know, it was a lower speed limit and then a fight to enforce it with automated enforcement. That one took a little bit longer. It took a few years. It was a multi-year advocacy campaign to make it happen with coalitions and crazy antics, but we were ultimately successful, and New York City now has the largest speed camera program in the nation. We then went to fight at the local level for New York City at the city council and successfully won a commitment from the last administration for a streets master plan, or what's now known as the New York City Streets Plan. So a commitment for a comprehensive overhaul of our most dangerous arterials, because as Luana will share, engineering fixes are the number one way to change behavior. And now we are going back to Albany to fix the compromises we were forced to make when we first passed authorization for a lower speed limit. We originally were pushing for 20. 20 is plenty. And we were told we will never get that. You have to compromise for 25. So thank you, Senator, for being the sponsor of a bill which you have so honorably named. Going to get me choked up after my son, and we will be fighting together with you to make that happen this session.
Thank you, Amy, and all of your advocacy, which is so personal but so profound.
Oh, you're on mute, Senator. Oh, I don't know what happened.
Thank you. That's strange that happened. I wanted to thank you personally, though, for all of your efforts, which is so personal but impactful on so many people across the state of New York. I wanted to ask you, through your travels in Albany, the ins and outs of offices, back rooms, public spaces, speeches, meetings, what's the most surprising thing you've learned as an advocate?
I mean, it's something I think I've learned and I've seen as we've grown in Families for Safe Streets with other chapters across the country, is that sadly this work is harder than it needs to be. Change is harder to accomplish than it needs to be. And you have to be tenacious and strategic and creative and not give up. You know, really elevate the voices of those personally impacted like me, and, you know, fight for change. Basically using strategies like you would a political campaign, you know, identify your supporters and your opponents, figure out who's the linchpin and the decision maker, you know, who may be on the fence that you have to move, and then figure out how are you going to move them? Who do they listen to? You know, are they unions or hospitals or school groups that if you know, got on board and built a strong coalition with them as supporters, that key decision maker, that key target would maybe listen to more. And then don't be afraid to take action when all the usual inside outside strategies don't work. When you meet with them and they say the right thing, but the bill isn't passing, and you're building, hold vigils and rallies. I mean, I can't tell you what we did for our speed camera pride. It was really insane. I took my car and I parked in front of the office of the legislator who was holding up the bill, and I held a 24-hour vigil with my phone and support. I got local constituents to come by and I filmed them, and they put a little sticker on my car why they supported speed cameras. And I tweeted out their message and, tagged that elected for 24 solid hours. We had 5 moms who lost their kids walk the equivalent of a marathon around the block of that legislator, 26 miles. So, I mean, we engaged in all kinds of crazy things to get the attention of the media and put that pressure on. And sadly, I've learned that's what it takes.
Thanks. Moving to the city side, Kim, can you give us a bit of perspective on the speed safety camera program that Amy and others fought for in New York City from an administrator's perspective?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here. And Amy, you remind me why we do this work every time I talk to you. So I'm grateful to you for, continuing to push. For us in New York City, as people who oversee the Vision Zero program, the breadth of the speed camera program is a total game changer. What we have now is over 2,000 speed cameras. Originally, we were allowed to have only about 140 of them, and in our school zones. They had to be right in front of the schools. You remember this, Senator. And over time, with all of the work of Families for Safe Streets and TA and the other advocates, we now are able to put our cameras in 750 different zones. We can have up to 3 cameras in those zones, and it can be within a quarter-mile radius of the school. And that has been tremendous. And over time, I think one of the things that we've done in partnership so well is we've kind of rolled it out one life-saving piece at a time, right? So first it was in these small zones, then it was, farther, then it was from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. In New York City, school is a place where kids go to get breakfast, and they often stay late to play sports and to get everything that they need. So this really built a wonderful proof of concept, right? That as we did this, we've seen huge changes. And we were even able to win 24 hours, 7-day operation of these cameras as of August 1st. And Senator, if I can give you just a few little snippets of some of the things we know about why these cameras work. First of all,
specifically, can you tell us how it's been successful in reducing speeding?
Yeah, absolutely. So like if we look at the program overall, and I have my numbers all the way through to 2021, in the whole course of the program, we, license plate will only get 1 or 2 violations, notices of liability within the whole time of the program. That's about 60%. And in 2021, we had about 85% of people who got speed camera violation only got 1 or 2. So this is how we know, and that means in the whole program. So you get a speed camera ticket in one location in all of New York City, and you don't get another one anywhere on the streets of New York. So that's how we know as a behavior modification, it's really working. What we did know, though, in 2021 is that we had a lot of crashes that happened overnight on blocks where if we had had the speed camera on, these crashes wouldn't have happened. So that's why it was so important to go to 24/7. And again, that now it's only since August 1st. We do know, or we are hopeful that we are going to see that same spike in violations and then that drop down, which will be a tremendous help in the fight for safer speeds. And obviously we have lots and lots of engineering tools that we've used. This to us is the most important piece. And with the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit change in 2014, we've been able to, really engineer around that, which has been really remarkable.
Thank you. And the incremental approach that we've taken, why do you think that's necessary? Is there in another universe would we have been able to scale that up faster?
No, I mean, first of all, look, as important as it is to, not put the emphasis on like an education, education first approach, I say as the Assistant Commissioner for Education, culture change is real. And you have to really win proof of concept in hearts and minds. You can't just throw this out in a huge way because we would have just been accused of doing some sort of money grab. Some of the other incremental things that have been terrific, and really this has been under Amy's leadership, is that we have kept these violations to $50 each. So it has never become, like a huge money grab. It's always been, here is this, as you say, Amy, a slap on the wrist, and then, hopefully we see a change. And we really have had to convince people of this. And we have a lot of amazing data now. A lot of it's raw. We're not really ready to completely come out with it, but we really are being able to also start seeing that people are getting speed tickets in communities that they don't live in. So this is another piece of this, right? Trying to really help people understand how it keeps their neighborhood protected from people who come from outside their neighborhoods. And so we really need to build this proof of concept, and we never would have been able to go to 24/7 and start to uncouple this from just the safety of children if it hadn't been so successful and if so many New Yorkers hadn't learned to slow their speeds on local streets.
Yeah, I think the data is just crucial, and the more you can share the data with us in Albany, who determine a lot of these laws, the better. We've been working, speaking of Albany, together on Sammy's Law. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about DOT's Albany vision for the 2023 legislative session?
I mean, sure. Look, we are looking to. We're always looking to figure out how we can use this valuable tool even more broadly. So we will be looking to work on, anything we can where we can see where speeding is really the major contributing factor to our crashes. And of course, in the last 2 years of our traffic fatality data, we see so many motor vehicle occupants who are making up our fatalities. So we really are trying to also figure out how we can use this automated enforcement to help us, really also get control over that. We are seeing great results. They're not fast enough and they're not good enough, but we are seeing great results in, how this is contributing to pedestrian fatalities and injuries, and cyclist fatalities and injuries. And we need to start to broaden the power of this tool. So more to follow.
Thank you. And any other top priorities you'd like to note?
Oh, sure. I mean, look, our top priorities are always engineering. As you probably know, we're looking at our most dangerous intersections. We're looking at, all of the metrics that have been discussed in the New York City Streets Plan. We're really moving through quickly, and we're always looking for permanent fixes and also quick fixes. So we're continuing to, really work with the simplest things like leading pedestrian intervals and things like that, which are really helping us with our failure to yield crisis, in addition to our speeding crisis. So there's a lot of work to do. But the good thing is that we have amazing partners like you in Albany and with our wonderful advocates, particularly Families for Safe Streets. So thank you, Senator.
Well, we look forward to supporting your efforts,
Thanks.
Working side by side with Amy and others. Wanted to zoom out a little bit. I always say, why should legislators in Buffalo and Binghamton control the speed limits for folks in Brooklyn? But other states have taken that approach and asked the same question to get there. They've recently passed legislation to grant cities more control over the speed limits on their streets, changes that have resulted or will result in speed limit reductions in municipalities like Boston, Seattle, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Ethan, we'd like to hear more from you about your experience in Minneapolis.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks so much. Yeah, I can start with the speed limit side of things. So we, like, I think most states in the country, their state Department of Transportation controls speed limits kind of across the board. There's a lot of history of why that's the case. A lot of it is rooted in local decision makers didn't want to have that authority, especially transportation engineers. And we're happy to sort of like put that somewhere else, and to provide that barrier so that they could point to some, it was this roundabout way of like just being able to say, oh, that's somebody else's set it up that way. And so we faced that reality in Minnesota too, when we were preparing and talking with other cities about going to the legislature and seeking local control to set speed limits on our local streets. There were a lot of, especially city engineers, didn't want to have that authority. And so we went to the legislature, and we went with a really low key campaign. We had no grassroots, no advocacy. We just presented a pretty basic local control argument, backed with some of the realities we know around speed and the importance for safety. And through the process, we started initially, it was just going to be larger cities in Minnesota would have the authority, because we knew some cities would oppose us potentially. But ultimately through the process, it was actually more of a rural legislator, a Republican, who said, I support this, but every city in Minnesota should have this authority. And so the legislature made the bill for all cities, having the authority to set local speed limits. The first city in Minnesota to lower their speed limits 20 miles an hour was a city of 550 people. And so their process was a little less intensive than ours in Minneapolis, but we ultimately we got it through in one legislative session, and then we followed up with our speed limit evaluation and partnered with our neighboring city of St. Paul. And we decided collectively that 20 for our local streets was the appropriate base speed limit. And then we have busier streets, so most of them are 25, and then we still don't have authority over the state and county roadways. But we're working on that, not from an authority, but we recognize that those at 30 is too high. And so we're still working on that piece as well. So there's always more progress to be made. But I think at the core, the local control argument was really powerful for us. And then that was a recognizing then that we required that we still have to have local engineering judgment and study to set those speed limits. You can't just be solely a political decision, which I think some engineers still opposed us through the process, but having that was like enough for legislators to feel comfortable and like ignoring that opposition from some local engineers and supporting the bill. So we did lower our speed limits in 2020. And since then, we haven't done our full comprehensive evaluation, which will be coming next year. But we have seen some real promising things, especially when combined with other things. And I think that's one of the things that's really important with speed limits, is it's a base level starting point. Some people are saying, oh, is this all you're doing for? No, this is the starting point. It's an essential starting point. It impacts how we design our streets, especially at 20. That really changes what you can do from a design perspective to really support those safe speeds and make it so it's really hard to speed. But then it's also about,
lower speeds. Yeah. Lower speeds are necessary but not sufficient, essentially.
Definitely. Lower speed limits. To be clear, lower speed limits are necessary but can't be the only thing you do. You have to combine it with these with the street design measures to support those lower speed limits. We're seeking speed safety camera pilot authority here in Minnesota as well. really modeling ours in most ways after what's New York City has done. So thank you, New York, for really a great model. And then also
When are you getting
communicating at.
When are you getting your data in to determine whether this has been a success or not?
Yeah, we're doing our initial evaluation next year, and so we'll have a report that will hopefully come out late next year or early the year after. But we've seen in other cities already the promising results. Cities have gone to 20, whether it's Portland, Boston's at 25, but you see the promising results. Seattle. So there are already a lot of local examples, and we've done some internal stuff that really focused when we're combining it with things like the mobile speed display signs that say, oh, this is what your speed is, and then you're reinforcing this is what the speed limit is. We've seen really promising, like, lasting results at some of those locations, but fundamentally now we're building our streets to support the speed limits, and we see that, okay, we just built a street. Average speed before was 36 miles an hour. Average speed after was the speed limit, less than the speed limit, 24 miles an hour. And that's because we were designing it to achieve, in that case, what we had determined was the appropriate speed limit for that context.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to the mobile speed signs that you mentioned, are there any other programs or initiatives that you would like to discuss?
Yeah, so
any best practices for the rest of us?
I think another big piece is just being able to get out the word, but doing it in a way that allows people to be involved in the process and to also show that community support. So we've done this. Seattle, Portland have done this as well, as we've distributed a lot of 20 is plenty yard signs, and people love them. But then I get a few people who complain about the speed limit change. And I just said, hey, we've distributed 5,000 20 is plenty yard signs. So I know you may be concerned about this, but there's a lot of community support for this change, and you just are able to get out that word, but you're doing it in partnership, gives something for people to do. But then I think really for a lot of us, and I think the professional side, it's also like the 20 on the local streets where you can then put in your speed humps and your traffic circles, and you can design those streets to support 20 is really important part of it. But the biggest thing is also, how are we managing the speeds on our busier streets, our collector and arterial streets, where most of the severe and fatal crashes are happening in most cities? How are we not just saying, okay, that's only where people who happen, be able to afford to live on a quiet or local street can get all the traffic calming and this supporting of safe speeds. So we're really looking at, like a lot of folks, how can we do raised crossings or raised crosswalks that are designed also to not just raise visibility for pedestrians or bicyclists crossing the street, but also designed to slow folks down and force people to slow down. Because we had a 6-year-old in Minneapolis was killed earlier this year by a driver going 94 miles an hour on it was a county roadway with 30-mile-an-hour speed limit in that case. And there's a lot of backstory. Okay, he was fleeing police and blah blah blah. But at the core, I'm sorry, no one should be able to physically drive 94 miles an hour down a street in a neighborhood in Minneapolis. Like, that should be physically impossible to do. We do have design tools that we just historically have not been open to exploring on busier streets as well. And we have state rules in Minnesota that prohibit us from doing those, but we're working to change those and then pilot and push these out, because ultimately we have to go to those busier streets. We have to figure out how we're managing speeds. And we see that since 2020, just across the country, just how the reckless speeds, have come out and the impact that's had on people's lives.
One more quick question. I've been reading about brightly painted crosswalks, works of art to slow down cars. Do you think that works?
Well, we definitely know that visibility at crossings, crosswalks is definitely, it is a proven safety measure. Again, it isn't going to be the only thing you should do. A lot of these things you're bundling together, and so we need to combine those. But I think that's also just a really exciting way of how do you get in community involved? How are you building that that community side, because we ultimately we need all of these pieces coming together. I think Kim was talking about the culture change, and Amy's been so instrumental in like building that from the family side. But like, this is just another way to like build that community support, engage folks, reconnect our communities, and not divide people, and all of these things that collectively help us prioritize a culture of safety in addition to the street safety measures that we do out there.
Thanks. Well, we're going to zoom even farther out on our metaphorical Google map and look at national issues after having looked at some local and state efforts. A study was recently showing that 71% of traffic fatalities in Texas happened on state and federal roads, which lie outside of the jurisdiction of local municipalities to fix. According to a 2019 NAPTCO study, this is true for a majority of crashes across the country. It's certainly an issue in New York at the state level as well. Controlling speed just can't be left up to cities and towns. So I wanted to ask Luana, can you tell us a bit more about the safe system approach that you work on?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you again for being part of this panel. It truly is an honor to be here. And Amy, as a lot of people already said, your story is the reason why I wake up every day and I do what I do. It's definitely what our responsibility is, to save lives on our roads and try to have zero fatalities, zero serious injuries. So the safe system approach is a good topic now to follow up after all this conversation, because it basically just summarizes what I heard from all our panelists so far. So basically, January 2022, the U.S. Department of Transportation adopted the National Roadway Safety Strategy. So for the first time, we have a National Roadway Safety Strategy, and at its core is the safe system approach. So what is the safe system approach? It used to be that when we try to look at improving safety, especially on an engineering side of it, we're always looking at, let's reduce total crashes. And it was a very reactive approach. So it was basically, our data-driven analysis was based on crash reports or those hotspots where crashes already happened. And it was basically a very reactive approach to make safety improvements. Whereas now with the safe system approach, one of the fundamental principles is that safety is proactive. So as I said before, as safety professionals, our goal really is to make those improvements before crashes even happen. And now we understand that humans are vulnerable. So that's another principle of the safe system approach. And so I always like to bring that back to physics. And when we try to understand a crash, and you have all the kinetic energy that is transferred from a vehicle, let's say striking a pedestrian, our human body has limitations. And when this kinetic energy transfer is higher than our limitations, then it results in a fatality or a serious injury. And so the other principle that is part of the safe system approach is that humans make mistakes, right? So we know that crashes may happen, but our mission needs to be, if they do happen, how can we make sure that the severity of this crash is not going to result in a fatality or a serious injury? So those are a few principles on the safe system approach that are making us change how we think about safety improvement, and it's all in all areas. And as Ethan mentioned before, this is not a work for engineering or enforcement or just education. This really is a shared responsibility. So that's another principle for the safe system. You have to make sure that all these pieces will work together, and redundancy is crucial. So if one of those layers does not fail to work in a specific crash, you're covered by another layer. So if you're a road that is not necessarily designed for 40 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour speed limit, you have enforcement, you have education, you have other sorts of layers that would help you make sure that there are no fatalities or serious injuries in that. So that's basically where we're moving, especially with all the members that we talk to and all the jurisdictions. They're trying to move towards this more proactive and making sure that they reduce the severity of the crashes.
So can we take this safe system approach and scale it on a national level?
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're trying to. So the ITE, especially as an organization, we try to get professionals from the entire country and some international feedback also. And so the safe system approach, the federal highway, the US DOT actually just have a fund specifically for local jurisdictions, the Safe Streets and Roads for All. And this is the first time that the federal funds are available directly to local jurisdictions. So that's one way to skip you provide it to the state, and then the state can award that to local jurisdictions. And so the good thing about this national strategies now are that they have two options, right? So if you're a local jurisdiction and you don't have a plan in place yet, you can implement for just funds so you can develop this plan. So they're helping local jurisdictions develop their safety plans and what are their strategies, because the problem was sometimes several jurisdictions don't even know where to start. So there's the implementation funds for that. So they get help for all safety professionals and they can develop their strategy. And then there are the implementation plans as well. So when you have your plan in place and you commit to Vision Zero, and you can then apply for different grants for the implementation of your projects. And so, as I mentioned before, as an organization, what we try to do is, and this is a newer concept, especially in engineering, trying to make sure we reduce the speeds. And the number one process step on the speed management program, as Ethan already mentioned, is how do we set this appropriate speed limit? And so that's step number one, right? So everything starts from there. And there used to be that most jurisdictions would set a speed limit either based on statutory speed limits, depending on which road, and that's usually determined by the state. But also, there is an option for you to determine the speed limit for this road segment based on engineering studies. And so engineering studies used to be mostly focused on operating speed. So you go out to this road segment and then you do a speed study. 85% of people are automobile traffic are traveling at a certain speed. And then you set the speed limit in relation to that operating speed. But this has been changing now because we need to consider all vulnerable road users, especially when you're talking about all road users, especially if you're talking in the city. You need to make sure that you have to consider pedestrian activity, bicycle activity, micromobility users. Sometimes, especially in an urban core, you have so many activities happening. And you need to make sure that when you determine the speed limit, it's not going to be mostly based on an automobile speeds, operating speeds, or desired speeds. And so we're moving towards trying to define what a target speed would be. And so this is a big part also in line with the safe system approach. How can you determine what your target speed is going to be? And so as an example for Minneapolis or other cities, I actually have an example for the city of Seattle. They decided that they would try to reduce the non-arterial roads speed limits to 20 miles per hour. And their arterial streets, they would reduce that to 25 miles per hour. And so just by starting with having this target speed in mind, and then in addition, adding all the engineering, countermeasures and enforcement, all the parts, all the pieces together, they actually had positive safety results, and they reached a reduction of 26% in traffic fatalities. So that's just one example on how you can set up a target speed, and then all the design, enforcement, all the pieces together are going to allow drivers to comply with those speeds.
Thank you. That's really, really interesting. So we've looked at local, state, national. Now we're going to look at international. And when it comes to safe streets, we all have a lot to learn from different countries. So I'd love to ask Anna a few questions about the anti-speeding initiatives that she's seeing in Mexico. Anna, could you tell us a little more about some of the best practices that you've seen implemented in municipalities across Mexico?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. Actually, a lot of the topics that we've discussed so far, I think we see the same type of dynamics and the same type of topics propping up in Mexico and pretty much in all of Latin America. And I had prepared some slides. I don't know if I can share them just to illustrate a little bit. One of the projects that we're working on as part of ITDP in Mexico. So yeah, I wanted to talk about this project that we have that it's called Vision Zero for Youth. And what we want to do is promote the comprehensive road policies focusing on children in different parts of Latin America, specifically Mexico and Costa Rica. And what we're doing, Luana already explained the safe system approach and why it's so important. The name we use for it is Vision Zero in Mexico. And yeah, really what it's telling us is that we need to consider the interaction of different elements when it comes to road safety. It's not just enough to focus on speed. It's really, really important. It's one of the main factors that affect the probability and the severity of injuries after a collision, but you need to consider the interaction also of street design and engineering, and also how traffic regulations are designed, implemented, how is the law applied, and also how do you promote this culture of safe mobility and this shared responsibility that we all have when it comes to building a safe system. And what we're doing is we're taking that framework for Vision Zero and the safe system approach, and we're applying it to our most vulnerable users, and that is children. In Mexico, sadly, traffic collisions are the second leading cause of death for children under 9 years old. So we want to take the safe system approach and focus it on children and their immediate surroundings where they spend the most time, and that is their schools and their school communities and their trips back and from school. And by focusing on children, we're slowly building support for more comprehensive policy frameworks that then we're able to scale up. So a little bit about the work we do as part of this project is right now we're carrying out activities in Mexico and in Costa Rica. It all started really with the celebration of Walk and Bike to School Day. Walk and Roll to School Day. And this is a great opportunity to get children and local communities in touch with their local representatives. They get to walk to school, and local representatives get to see the conditions of the sidewalks and the streets that children walk every single day. And then they start committing to improving road safety in those communities. We accompany these activities by carrying out interventions around schools. So we implement traffic conflict analysis, try to identify where the most dangerous intersections are around schools and what kind of interventions we can do design-wise to make them safer. And then we carry out tactical urbanism and other types of infrastructure interventions to calm traffic, basically, in those surroundings. On parallel, we also work with state and municipal authorities to develop road safety plans and strategies and get them to identify possible activities that they can carry out that have specific goals and that can be evaluated and measured to improve road safety. And then we carry out public policy evaluations of those policies, specifically on speeding, as was the case of Mexico City. So we start very locally working around schools, and then we try to scale it up to start having an impact on metropolitan road safety plans. For example, I wanted to present a very specific case study, which is in Monterrey. If you don't know it, Monterrey is the second largest city in Mexico. It is located in the state of Nuevo León in the north, and it's a very car-centric city. It's also one that has very high statistics of road crashes. Something like 21% of all crashes in Mexico are registered in Monterrey, and 90% of those happen in Monterrey's metropolitan area. This is very complex, and we start getting into how governance is structured in Mexico, because we're talking about a metropolitan area that's made up of 14 different municipalities, and traffic regulations very much vary by municipality. But one of the things that we notice is that 2 out of 3 collisions involve vulnerable users, pedestrians, cyclists, but increasingly motorcyclists. And especially when it comes to injuries, pedestrians are overrepresented. So how do you start tackling something like this? And it's been a very interesting process, actually, that has been slowly building up. We really started in 2019 when one of the main municipalities in Monterrey, San Pedro Garza Garcia, it's one of the wealthiest, started participating in Walk and Bike to School Day. And on this occasion, the mayor had the opportunity to accompany children and to listen from them the kind of challenges that they experience when they go to school, and to listen from them the kind of cities that they would want. And from there, the mayor committed to improving road safety. And this coincided with the passing of a new law for mobility and accessibility in the state of Nuevo León that gave more responsibilities and more powers to the municipalities to target road safety. So now they have, for example, one of the things that they have to do now is to publish the road safety strategies, that they have to be updated every 3 years, and they also have to coordinate with each other. So in Mexico, depending on the hierarchy of roads, different institutions come into play. So for example, primary roads, often they're high-speed roads, those are, or main arteries, those are overseen by state governments, but then secondary roads or local roads are overseen by the municipalities. So now they have to coordinate with one another and make sure that it all works as a system and that they're all coordinating with each other, which is quite a challenge in itself, when before that they might have been making decisions without consulting one another. So that changed with this new law. And based on the experience from Walk and Bike to School Day, San Pedro decided to become the first municipality in Monterrey to publish its road safety strategy. And it's a very wealthy municipality. It has a lot of technical capacities. It very much became this role model for other municipalities in Nuevo León. Last year, we also had elections in Mexico. So Nuevo León elected a new governor and new mayors for the municipalities. And we wanted to take advantage of this key political moment to kind of kickstart activities on road safety. So what we did from ITDP, we came up with this campaign and we got candidates to commit to road safety. They were very simple commitments. We were asking them to commit to reducing the number of injuries and deaths due to traffic collisions. We were asking them to build safer streets by lowering speed limits, by building infrastructure for pedestrians and for vulnerable users, and not just focusing on car infrastructure. We sent them a list of possible things that they could implement to make safer streets, and obviously to keep this focus on vulnerable users and especially on children. And it was a very successful campaign. We actually
Was there any pushback? Was there any opposition to your efforts on from different political parties?
No, actually that was a challenge because we didn't want it to become politicized. So we had to make sure that we had a representation of different political parties. We have like 3 main political parties in Mexico. So we made sure that everyone signed up to these commitments. We really got the elected mayor of Nuevo León to sign the commitments, as well as the mayors of Monterrey and San Pedro. But yeah, part of the idea of focusing on children and vulnerable users is to try to not politicize it. When it starts to get a lot more pushback is when we start to implement a lot of these changes. For example, lowering speed limits is very unpopular. So that's always a very big challenge when it comes to that. And well, I'll talk about that maybe a bit later. But based on this campaign and these commitments that the elected officials took, we started, sorry, I'm gonna minimize this. The state government created these metropolitan coordination working tables. And basically they got representatives from the 14 different municipalities in Nuevo León and the metropolitan area of Monterrey to start working on common issues that they all have. And one of the priority topics that they're working on is road safety. So we've been carrying out a series of workshops with these representatives, as well as civil society and academics, just to explain the concept of the same system approach, the main risk factors that come to road safety, and kind of change that mindset of how we approach road safety. And then we're working alongside them to develop a common metropolitan vision with common goals and common activities. So for example, some of the things that we're working on changing right now is updating the local traffic regulations. A few months ago, Mexico passed a new general law for mobility and road safety, and that establishes new speed limits across the country. So we want to update all that normative framework and specifically the traffic regulations at the local level in Monterrey. We're also working on communications campaign. And another very big part of it is just how do we improve data collection and this coordination of different decision-making across different levels, both at the state and local levels, but also between the different municipalities. And that's a little bit of the work that we're doing right now in Mexico. But yeah, we start getting a lot of pushback when it comes to
Speed
lowering
limits.
speed limits. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I was going to ask Ethan and Luana in particular, and Amy, and Kim, everyone else. Are we lacking federal leadership on this issue? I mean, you heard what they're doing at the national level in Mexico. Kim, what do you think?
That's a very funny question. You mean my old boss, who's now in charge of the of USDOT? No, I actually think that adopting the Safe Streets platform is going. I mean, the Safe Systems platform is really going to be a game changer. And I do think that there's a true understanding about speed management and all of the things that it takes. I just think, until until municipalities start getting this federal money, which they'll be mandated to do, right? We're going to need states and cities to be meeting these mandates, which will help us with some of the political roadblocks, which I think you're very familiar with. I do think, obviously it's the first foray here, so it's not going to be perfect, but I think keeping the, as Luana said, really keeping all of the principles, for speed management at the forefront will be incredibly helpful. And I also think it does help that people who are now running USDOT, do see the value of an automated compliance program, basically, instead of just the traditional, some of the other traditional ways of enforcement. I don't know. What do you think, Amy? If you don't mind me asking.
Bolder leadership at the federal, state, and local level across the country. I mean, the newest numbers just came out, and the United States has 12.67 people killed per 100,000.
Yeah, that's
double that of Canada, more than double that of Canada,
right.
4 times that of almost every industrialized nation. We rank 47 out of 54 high-income nations. It's a disgrace. And we need much bolder leadership, and we need our leaders to not cave to the pushback from the automobile industry on regulation, from, constituents who complain that they don't like faster, slower speed limits or getting a speeding ticket because, it inconveniences them. I'm sorry, everybody can be inconvenienced to save a life. Wait till it happens to their family, and they will finally understand.
And Anna, do you have the same federal state dichotomy that we have, where in order for the states to go along, the federal government has to basically give them money? Is that how it works in Mexico?
Yeah, to a degree. We do have the same kind of government system. It's federal, and yeah, a lot of the budget for the states is decided at the federal level from Congress. But one of the issues right now, because we have a government that is really focusing on austerity measures, and the budget has gone down in a lot of cities, is, for example, in the case of automated speed limits, how can we make them sustainable without changing the objective of the program and making them monetary centered? So how do we change behavior but make sure that the systems are economically sustainable? That's one of the challenges that we're facing right now, and actually part of the evaluations that we carry out is to see how we can improve these systems while keeping the behavioral change that we want with them.
And tell us more about your attempts to lower speed limits and where you're facing resistance, and maybe we can learn from that.
Well, it's happening at different levels again. I think some of the most successful interventions that I've seen have really been at the local level with like street calming interventions, and that's very much based on infrastructure. We're struggling a lot when it comes to, for example, the automated systems. And in the case of Mexico City, it's been very controversial, for example, because the speed camera program started in 2016. And it was very much perceived as a money grab. So the location of the cameras, people said that they were located in places where they would get the most tickets and receive the most money. So when the new administration came, they changed the location of the cameras to make sure that they were in the places where most traffic collisions happened. But then they also changed the sanctions, and they changed from monetary sanctions to purely civic sanctions. So people, instead of getting a monetary ticket or an economic fine, they now have to carry out, for example, education, training courses, and social work and those kind of things. A bit of the idea behind it is that people would value their time more than the fine itself. It's been very controversial since it's the only system of its type. We don't know if that's enough to change behavior without the economic fine. A lot of places that implement this type of things have more of a hybrid system where they don't get rid of the economic fines. And that's why evaluation is so important. What we need to make sure is to see whether or not it's having a positive impact on reducing deaths and injuries and traffic collisions. And there's not enough data. And what we need to do is have these independent evaluations that let us kind of separate speeding control from political times and from political discourses. So every time there's an administration change, the programs can continue without these massive
Tim, what do you think
disruptions.
of what do you think of non-economic fines?
I mean, there's other things that you can do, but I think that there has to be some, do you mean like points on a license or things like that? I mean, there has to be some sort of.
As Anna was saying, there could be community service, for example.
Right. Well, sure. I mean, those things can happen. I mean, I think interestingly, as someone who oversees a community service program for people serving their DWI sentences, sometimes community service is, has huge economic impacts on people's lives. So I'm not sure, when you swap one out for the other, I think the important thing is making sure that, people don't go through a spiral where, they lose too many things. But again, if you can keep your fine tidy, that can really help. And also there are some countries in which fines are directly connected to people's incomes, and that can be a very interesting way to go. So that it is a meaningful amount of money, but that's a very different thing for many different people. I know that there are some countries who have explored that as well. But there has to be some consequence, something has to happen.
Yeah, and we need to push back against the money grab, narrative that we hear really at every level of government.
Right. I mean, one of the things that we've done, and we've featured Amy's story and some other stories from Families for Safe Streets. It's always important to give people a why, right? Like, why are we doing this? We're doing this because this is what can happen, right? Really carefully constructing. And we did that with 25 miles an hour. And we've done it again for, why are we getting compliance through automated enforcement? And why does it matter in your neighborhood? And how could it impact your life? And how has it impacted the lives of others? I do think it's important.
We're not doing it in New York City, but there are places across the country that either have or have proposed actually taking the revenue from the cameras and earmarking it to either fix specifically the street that the cameras were on or something in that community. And I do think it's an important variable people should consider as they implement automated enforcement programs.
I think that's a really good point. One of the ways I think we got congestion pricing passed was to dedicate it specifically to hopefully local projects and in transit deserts. We just have one more minute left. I'm going to ask Luana and Amy for some final thoughts. Luana, any pointers you want to drive home before we close? And then I'll let Amy have the last word.
Yeah, I think I just want to finalize by a comment that you made. So based on the federal initiatives and everything, I think that's something that Kim mentioned. It all starts by the commitment. And I think we are committed. I think we're committed. I think we're going on the right direction. And there are several examples, even on partnerships. You mentioned something about if it's a state route and it's in the city, how can you do that coordination? So I think collaboration is the key word if you want to keep this moving forward. And as an organization, what we're trying to do is to get all case studies. We want to listen from cities, from states. What are the success stories? What are their challenges? And we're compiling all this in these publications that I just want to make sure that you're aware it's coming. So safe system approach for the urban core, safe system approach to speed management, New York City speed cameras program is included in there. City of Minneapolis is included in there. So it's easier for jurisdictions to learn from challenges and learn with success stories. So just keep an eye out for, all
Thank you.
those resources that are coming.
Thank you. Amy, you have the last word.
Just keep up the fight. If you're an advocate, don't give up, keep pushing. This is a preventable public health crisis. We have the solutions, we have the tools, we just need to fight to put them in place. And if you're coming from a public sector, an elected official or a DOT person, don't view advocates as your enemy. We're here to help you get the work done and to help you put in place the solutions that you're really hoping to do. So thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Senator, for all you do for today, for sponsoring Sammy's Law, and for being a street safety champion.
Thank you, everyone.